The explosion tore through the hull of the UEN Meridian like a knife through paper, and Commander Alara Vance felt the entire ship shudder beneath her feet as alarms screamed through every corridor. She grabbed the railing as the artificial gravity flickered once, twice, then stabilized just enough to keep her from floating into the ceiling. "Report." She shouted into her communicator, but only static answered her call. The bridge was gone. She had seen it vaporize in the first strike, taking Captain Morrison and half the command crew with it in a flash of fire and twisted metal. Now, she was the highest-ranking officer left alive on a dying ship. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the viewport, the enemy was coming. The Valkyrie had found them. Alara pushed herself off the wall and started running through the smoke-filled corridor, her mind racing through everything she knew about their attackers. The Valkyrie Dominion had conquered 37 species across 6 star systems, and not a single one of those species still existed as a free people. Some had been enslaved, forced to work in mines and factories until their bodies gave out. Others had been hunted to extinction, their entire civilizations erased from history like they had never existed at all. The Valkyrie were not just conquerors, they were predators in the truest sense of the word. 7 feet of scaled muscle and razor-sharp claws, with eyes that could see heat signatures through walls and venom that could paralyze a grown man in seconds. Every species they encountered did the same thing when the Valkyrie came for them. They ran, they hid, they begged, and then they died. Alara rounded a corner and nearly tripped over a body Ensign Peters, his eyes still open and staring at nothing. 3 deep gashes across his chest where a Valkyrie hunter had already passed through. She knelt beside him just long enough to close his eyes, then kept moving. There was no time for grief. Not yet. Not while there were still people alive who needed her help. She found them in the cargo bay near engineering 3 civilians who had been traveling on the Meridian as part of a diplomatic exchange program. There was Dr. Samuel Chun, a xenobiologist in his 60s who clutched a wounded arm against his chest. Beside him sat Maria Santos, a young translator who had celebrated her 25th birthday just 3 days ago. Her face pale with shock and fear, and huddled against the wall was Thomas Reed, a cultural attaché who had taken a piece of shrapnel to the leg and could barely stand. They looked up at Alara with desperate hope in their eyes, and she felt the weight of their survival settle onto her shoulders like a physical burden. "Commander," Dr. Chung gasped. "Thank God you're alive. We heard the explosions and we didn't know what to do. We just ran and hid and—" "It's okay," Alara said, keeping her voice calm even though her heart was pounding against her ribs. "I'm here now, and I'm going to get you out of this." She moved to the door and listened, her ear pressed against the cold metal, and she could hear them in the distance, the heavy footsteps of Valkyrie hunters moving through the ship, their guttural clicking language echoing through the corridors as they searched for survivors. There were at least a dozen of them, maybe more, and they were getting closer with every passing minute. Maria grabbed Alara's arm with trembling fingers and whispered, "The escape pods? Can we reach the escape pods before they find us?" Alara had already thought about that, had already mapped the route in her head and calculated the odds. The answer made her stomach turn. "There's 1 pod left on Deck 7, she said quietly. "But to reach it, we would have to pass through the main corridor. And that's exactly where they're hunting right now. So we're trapped," Thomas said from the floor, his voice hollow with despair. "We're trapped, and we're going to die here." "No," Alara said, and something hard and cold settled into her chest as she spoke the word. "No, we are not going to die here." She looked around the cargo bay, and for the first time since the attack began, she stopped thinking about escape. She started thinking about something else entirely. The cargo bay was connected to the main engineering section, which meant it had access to the ship's power grid and emergency systems. There were oxygen canisters stacked against the far wall, Meant for emergency hull breaches, industrial chemicals sat in sealed containers near the maintenance hatch. Electrical conduits ran through the ceiling, carrying enough current to power the entire deck, and in the corner, covered by a tarp, was a portable welding unit that the repair crews used for hull maintenance. Alara walked to the main door and examined the frame, then turned back to the others with a look they didn't understand. "What are you doing?" Dachan asked, confusion mixing with voice. "I'm not running," Alara said simply. And she pulled the welding unit out from under the tarp and began heating up the torch. Maria stared at her like she had lost her mind and said, "Commander, we have to find a way out. We have to escape before they find us." "That's exactly what they expect us to do," Alara replied as she began welding the door shut, sparks flying in the dim emergency lighting. Every species the Velkari have ever hunted has done the same thing. They run, they hide, they try to escape. And the Velkari chase them down one by one. She paused her work and looked back at the three civilians, and they saw something in her eyes that made them fall silent. "I'm not going to run," she said. "I'm going to make them regret ever stepping foot on this ship." Far above them, on what remained of the Meridian's bridge, War Priestess Thesara of the Velkari Dominion stood among the wreckage and watched the thermal feeds from her hunters' helmet cameras. She was ancient by her people's standards, over 200 years old, and in all that time, she had personally overseen the conquest of 6 species. She had watched them flee in terror, had tasted their fear on the air, had felt the primal satisfaction of the hunt as her warriors ran them down like the prey they were. It was the natural order of things. Predators hunted, and prey fled. But as she watched the thermal signature of the last human officer move through the lower decks, she noticed something strange. The human was not moving toward the escape pods. She was moving away from them. Thesara leaned closer to the screen, her secondary eyelids flickering with an emotion she barely recognized. The human had stopped in a cargo bay near engineering, and instead of trying to find a way out, she appeared to be fortifying her position, sealing doors, moving equipment, preparing for something interesting. Thesara murmured, and a thin smile spread across her scaled face as she turned to her second in command. "Continue the sweep, but leave the one in engineering to me. I want to see this human for myself." She had broken the spirits of countless prey species over the centuries, had watched hope die in their eyes as they realized there was no escape. This human would be no different, or so she believed. The sound of claws scraping against metal echoed through the corridor outside the cargo bay, and Alara felt every muscle in her body tense as she listened to death approaching. She had finished her preparations 20 minutes ago, and now there was nothing left to do but wait. The 3 civilians huddled behind a stack of heavy machinery in the far corner of the room, hidden from view and hopefully from the thermal sensors that the Velkari used to hunt their prey. Dr. Chun had wanted to protest, had wanted to argue that they should all hide together. But Alara had silenced him with a single look. When she comes through that door, Alara had told them, "You stay quiet, and you stay hidden no matter what you see or hear. Do you understand me?" They had nodded, too frightened to argue. And now Alara stood alone in the center of the cargo bay as the scraping sounds grew louder. And closer she could smell something through the damaged ventilation system, a sharp, acidic scent that made her eyes water and her throat tighten. It was the smell of Velkari venom, and it meant that whoever was coming was old and powerful. Their venom glands fully developed after centuries of use. The welded door began to glow red at the edges, and Alara watched as a ceremonial blade curved and wickedly sharp slowly cut through the metal like it was nothing more than soft butter. The Velkari on the other side was taking her time, cutting with deliberate slowness, and Alara understood immediately what this meant. She wanted Alara to hear it. She wanted her to feel the terror building with every passing second, to imagine what was about to come through that door and what it would do to her when it arrived. There was a psychological tactic designed to break the prey's spirit before the physical confrontation even began. Alara took a deep breath and forced her heart rate to slow, forced her hands to stop trembling, forced her mind to become calm and clear like the surface of a frozen lake. She had faced death before. She had looked into the void and refused to blink. She would not break now. The door fell inward with a deafening crash, and War Priestess Zara stepped through the smoking frame like a nightmare. Given form, she was enormous, over 7 feet tall, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that glowed like molten gold in the dim emergency lighting. Her body was covered in ceremonial scars, each one representing a species she had personally helped conquer, and around her neck hung a necklace of bones from creatures that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had never known what it meant to be prey, her every step radiating confidence and power and absolute certainty in her own supremacy. Thesser stopped just inside the door and tilted her head, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. As she studied the human standing before her, she could taste the fear. It was unmistakable, a chemical signature that prey species could never fully suppress. No matter how brave they tried to bait, human's heart was racing, her sweat glands were active, and her pupils were dilated with the primal terror response that the Sara had seen in 1,000 species before. But something was wrong. The human was not running. She was not hiding or begging or crying or doing any of the things that prey was supposed to do. When faced with an apex predator, she was just standing there in the middle of the room with her hands at her sides, watching the Sara with an expression that the War Priestess could not quite identify. Thesser began to circle slowly, her claws clicking against the deck plating as she moved around the perimeter of the room. And still the human did not move. "You are the commander of this vessel," the Zara said, her voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the metal walls. "My hunters have told me about you. They say you sealed yourself in here rather than trying to escape." Alara turned her head to track the War Priestess's movement but did not step back or try to create distance between them. "I did," she said simply. Thessera's secondary eyelids flickered again, that same strange sensation she had felt on the bridge returning even stronger now. "The escape pod on Deck 7 is still functional," the Zara continued. "You could have reached it. If you had moved quickly, my hunters would have pursued you, but you might have had a chance to get away." "I know," Alara said, "and yet you chose to stay here," the Zara said, stopping directly in front of the human and looming over her like a mountain of scale and muscle. "You chose to trap yourself in a room with no exit while my warriors swept through your ship. Why?" Alara looked up at the creature that towered over her. This ancient predator who had ended civilizations and broken entire species, and she felt the fear pulsing through her veins like liquid fire. But she did not run, she did not hide, she did not beg. Instead, she smiled. Thesara saw the expression spread across the human's face, and for one brief moment she felt something she had not experienced in over a century: uncertainty. "Why don't you flee, human?" the Zara demanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous growl as she leaned closer, her venomous fangs just inches from Alara's face. "Every species flees when they face us. It is the natural order, the way of predator and prey that has existed since the first hunters stalked the first victims in the darkness of the ancient worlds." Alara's smile did not waver, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and calm and utterly without the trembling fear that the Zara expected to hear. "Because my species didn't claw its way to the top of our food chain by running." The words hung in the recycled air of the cargo bay, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Thesara stared at the human, trying to process what she had just heard, trying to make sense of a prey creature that spoke like a predator. "The top of your food chain?" the Zara repeated slowly, and a harsh laugh escaped her throat. "You are soft and small and weak. You have no claws, no fangs, no venom, no armor. What could possibly make you think that your species is anything other than prey?" Alara took a step forward, and Zara found herself taking a half step back before she could stop herself. It was an instinctive movement, a reaction so automatic that she barely registered it happening. And when she realized what she had done, cold shock rippled through her ancient body. She had never stepped back from prey before, never. "Let me tell you something about my species," Elara said, and her voice had changed now. It was harder, colder, filled with something that sounded almost like hunger. "Let me tell you about a little planet called Earth, and what happened to everything that ever tried to hunt us there." Nisara wanted to strike, wanted to end this conversation with a single swipe of her claws, wanted to remind this creature what it meant to stand before a war priestess of the Valkyrie Dominion. But she did not move. Some instinct she did not understand, some ancient warning buried deep in her predator's brain, told her to listen, and for the first time in 200 years, Nisara obeyed that instinct. She listened. Elara began to speak, and her voice filled the cargo bay like the rumble of distant thunder rolling across an endless plain. "Earth is a death world," she said, and she watched Nisara's golden eyes narrow at the unfamiliar term. "Every species in the galaxy has a homeworld that shaped them, that made them into what they are. And Earth made us into something that you have never encountered before." She took another step forward, and this time, Nisara held her ground, though her claws flexed instinctively at her sides. "When my ancestors first walked upright on the plains of Africa millions of years ago, they were not the strongest creatures there. They were not even close." Alara's voice dropped lower, and there was something ancient and primal in her tone now, something that spoke of memories written into her very blood. There were great cats that could kill a human with a single bite, their fangs as long as my hand and their muscles powerful enough to drag a body up into a tree. There were wolves that hunted in packs, working together to bring down prey 10 times their size. There were crocodiles that lurked in rivers and lakes, waiting for anything foolish enough to come to the water's edge. There were snakes with venom that could stop a heart in minutes, and spiders that could paralyze with a single bite, and insects that carried diseases that killed millions of our kind. Nisara listened, and despite herself, she felt a growing fascination with this small creature's words. "Your world sounds hostile," Nisara admitted. "Many prey species come from dangerous planets. It does not change what they are." "You're right," Elara said, and that cold smile returned to her face. "A dangerous world alone would not make us anything special. Many species have survived dangerous worlds and remain prey forever, trembling in caves and hiding from the predators that stalk them." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was like ice. "But we did not hide. We did not tremble. We looked at every creature that hunted us, and we decided that we would hunt them instead." Nisara's tongue flicked out again, tasting the air, and she realized with a shock that the human's fear scent was fading. It was being replaced by something else, something she had never tasted on prey before. It smelled like hunger. "We had no claws," Elara continued, "so we picked up rocks and sharpened them into blades that could cut through hide and bone. We had no fangs, so we carved spears from wood and learned to throw them with enough force to pierce the thickest skull. We had no venom, so we discovered poisons in plants and insects and learned to coat our weapons with them. We had no armor, so we stripped the skins from the animals we killed and wore them as protection." She took another step forward, and now she was close enough to Nisara that she could feel the heat radiating from the war priestess's scaled body. And when all of that was not enough, we discovered something that changed everything. We discovered fire. Nisara felt a strange chill run down her spine at the word, though she did not understand why. "Fire was our first great weapon," Elara said, and there was reverence in her voice now, mixed with something darker. "We took the burning heart of the world itself and made it serve us. We used it to cook our food so we could digest more nutrients and grow bigger brains. We used it to light the darkness so predators could no longer ambush us at night. And we used it to burn the forests and grasslands where our enemies hid. You burned your own world? The Zara asked, and there was disbelief in her voice. We burned anything that threatened us, Alara replied. We were not trying to live in harmony with nature. We were trying to conquer it, to dominate it, to make every other creature on our planet understand that they existed only because we allowed them to. She began to pace slowly, and the Zara found herself turning to track the human's movement, her predator instinct screaming at her that something was very wrong here. But fire and tools and weapons were only part of what made us dangerous. Alara said, the real weapon, the thing that no other species on Earth could match, was something much simpler. And what was that? The Zara asked, hating herself for the curiosity in her voice. Endurance, Alara said, and the words seemed to hang in the air between them. We were persistence hunters. She stopped pacing and faced the Zara directly. Her eyes locked onto those glowing golden orbs. We could not run as fast as the antelope or the deer. We could not overpower the great cats or the wolves. But we had something they did not have. We could keep going long after they had to stop. Our bodies were designed to regulate heat through sweating, which meant we could run for hours under the burning sun while other animals collapsed from exhaustion. We could track prey across entire continents, following their footprints and their scent for days and days and days without ever giving up. We would chase an animal until its heart gave out from exhaustion, until it literally dropped dead from running. And then we would eat it. The Zara stared at the human, and for the first time in her long life, she understood what it must feel like to be prey. You chased your food until it died from being chased? She asked, and her voice was quieter now. We chased everything, Alara said. We chased animals, and then we chased other humans who threatened us. And then we chased the very idea of anything being more powerful than we were. The great cats that once hunted us? We hunted them to near extinction, and now they exist only in protected reserves where we allow them to live. The wolves that stalked our ancestors? We captured their young and bred them over thousands of generations until they became dogs' loyal servants, who loved us and obeyed us and would die for us. The mammoths and the mastodons and the saber-toothed tigers that once ruled our world. Gone. Every single one of them, wiped out by a species with no natural weapons at all. She leaned closer to the Zara, and her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed louder than a shout. We did not become apex predators because we were born that way. We became apex predators because we refused to accept being anything else. Every creature that ever tried to hunt us learned the same lesson eventually. You can kill a human, but you cannot make us afraid forever, because fear does not make us run. Fear makes us dangerous. The Zara's claws extended fully, her body tensing for combat as every instinct she possessed screamed at her to strike, to kill this creature before it said another word. But she hesitated, and in that hesitation, Alara saw her opportunity. You came to this ship thinking you were the hunter, Alara said softly. But you made the same mistake every predator makes. When they encounter humans for the first time, you forgot to ask yourself a very important question. The Zara's voice was barely a whisper now. What question? Alara smiled, and it was the smile of something that had clawed its way up from the bottom of the food chain by sheer force of will. If we killed everything that ever hunted us, what makes you think we won't do the same to you? 200 years of hunting, 200 years of conquest, 200 years of watching lesser species cower and beg and die. And now this small, soft creature dared to threaten her? The war priestess of the Valkyrie Dominion roared with fury and lunged at the human, with all the speed and power of an apex predator who had never known defeat her. Claws slashed through the air where Alara's throat had been just a fraction of a second before, and the Zara felt a surge of surprise as her strike met nothing but empty space. The human had moved not backward, not away, not in the direction that prey always fled. she had dropped to the floor and rolled sideways, moving toward the Sara rather than away from her. And before the War Priestess could adjust her attack, Ilara was behind the heavy blast shield she had positioned earlier. The Sara spun to face her prey, her golden eyes blazing with rage, and she opened her mouth to deliver the killing curse that had ended the lives of 1,000 enemy leaders. But Ilara was faster. Her hand slammed down on a panel that the Sara had not noticed, hidden beneath a loose piece of deck plating. And suddenly the cargo bay was filled with a thunderous hissing sound. The oxygen canisters that Ilara had positioned throughout the room ruptured simultaneously, their seals broken by the remote triggers she had wired together during her preparations, and pure oxygen flooded into the enclosed space at a rate that would have killed an unprotected human in minutes. But Ilara had known this would happen. She had planned for it. She had counted on it. The Sara felt the change in the air immediately. Her lungs burned with the sudden increase in oxygen. Her scales tingled with an unfamiliar sensation, and every predator instinct in her body screamed that something terrible was about to happen. Your species evolved on a world with methane traces in the atmosphere, Ilara shouted from behind the blast shield, her voice cutting through the hissing of the oxygen canisters. I read the intelligence reports on Velkari biology when I was assigned to this diplomatic mission. I know exactly what pure oxygen does to your kind. The Sara tried to move toward the human, but her movements felt sluggish and uncoordinated, her muscles responding more slowly than they should have. It makes you slower, Ilara continued. It disrupts your nervous system and interferes with your coordination, and it makes your scales incredibly flammable. The War Priestess's eyes widened as she finally understood what was about to happen, and she turned toward the door she had cut through, desperate to escape the trap she had walked into. But Ilara triggered the second part of her plan before the Sara could take more than 3 steps. The electrical conduits in the ceiling, the ones Ilara had carefully exposed and rewired during her preparations, discharged their full current in a single massive arc that lit up the cargo bay like a miniature sun. The spark met the oxygen-saturated air, and the world became fire. The Sara screamed as flames engulfed her body, her scales so proud and ancient and beautiful igniting like they had been soaked in fuel. She crashed into walls and equipment as she tried to escape the inferno, her enhanced healing trying desperately to repair damage that was accumulating faster than even her extraordinary biology could handle. The fire suppression systems activated automatically, flooding the room with chemical foam that smothered the flames before they could spread to the rest of the ship. But by then the damage was done. Thessara lay against the far wall, her body a ruin of burned scales and blistered flesh. One of her golden eyes was completely destroyed, melted shut by the heat, and her dominant arm hung uselessly at her side. The muscles and tendons cooked beneath the blackened scales. Her healing factor was working. She could feel it struggling to repair the catastrophic damage, but it would take hours, maybe days, before she would be able to fight again. Through her remaining eye, she watched as a figure emerged from behind the blast shield. Ilara walked toward her slowly, and the Sara could see that the human had not escaped unharmed. Burns covered her arms and the side of her face, and she moved with a limp that suggested she had injured her leg in the explosion, but she was still standing. She was still walking, and in her hand was a piece of hull metal that she had sharpened into a crude but deadly blade. That's the thing about humans, Ilara said as she approached the fallen War Priestess, her voice rough from the smoke she had inhaled. We never fight fair, we never have, and we never will. She stopped beside the Sara and looked down at the creature who had terrorized dozens of species across the galaxy. Your kind conquers through fear, Ilara said. You make your enemies so terrified that they cannot think, cannot plan, cannot do anything except run and hide and wait to die. The Sara tried to speak, tried to summon the dignity that had defined her entire existence. But all that came out was a weak croak of pain. But fear doesn't work on us the way it works on other species, Elara continued. And she crouched down so that she was eye level with the war priestess. When humans are afraid, we don't freeze. We fight harder. Fear makes our hearts pump faster, which sends more blood to our muscles. Fear makes our senses sharper, which helps us notice details we would have missed otherwise. Fear floods our bodies with chemicals that make us stronger and faster and more resistant to pain. She held up the sharpened metal and let the Sara see the light glinting off its edge. We took the thing that makes other species helpless and turned it into a weapon. We took terror and transformed it into focus. The Zara managed to speak at last, her voice a broken whisper that bore no resemblance to the commanding rumble it had been just minutes ago. "You are wounded," she said. "You are burned and bleeding, and yet you still came for me." Elara nodded slowly, and there was no triumph in her expression, no joy in her enemy's suffering, only a cold and terrible determination. "That's what we do," she said simply. "That's what we've always done. When the saber-toothed cat wounded our ancestors, they didn't run away to die. They turned around and killed it with spears. When diseases wiped out half our population, we didn't accept extinction. We studied the sickness and learned to cure it. When we discovered that our own sun would eventually destroy our world, we didn't despair. We started building ships to carry us to other stars." She stood up and looked down at the Sara with something that might have been pity. "We are not the apex predators because we are the strongest or the fastest or the most deadly," Elara said. "We are the apex predators because we refuse to lose, because giving up is simply not something we know how to do." The Zara felt consciousness beginning to slip away as her body devoted all its resources to the desperate task of keeping her alive. But before the darkness took her, she managed one final question. What are you going to do with me?" Elara's expression shifted, and something calculating entered her eyes. "I'm going to let you live," she said. And the words were more terrifying than any death threat could have been. "Because dead enemies can't deliver messages, and I have a message that your people need to hear." Elara worked through the pain as she dragged the barely conscious war priestess through the corridors of the dying meridian. Her burns screamed with every movement, and her injured leg threatened to give out with each step. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Stopping was not something humans did. The other Valkyrie hunters had heard the explosion, had seen the fire suppression alarms activate on their displays, and they had come running to aid their leader. They found only corpses. Elara had spent her time during the confrontation, while the oxygen canisters had not been her only trap. And the hunters who rushed blindly into her kill zones had paid the price for their arrogance. Some had triggered electrical snares that stopped their hearts instantly. Others had breathed in the chemical agents she had released into the ventilation system. One had simply walked into a doorway rigged with sharpened metal debris and fallen without ever seeing what had killed him. By the time Elara reached the escape pod on Deck 7, the Meridian was quiet. The only Valkyrie left alive on the ship was the broken creature she dragged behind her doctor. Chan, Maria, and Thomas had followed at a distance, too shocked by what they had witnessed to do anything except obey when Elara told them to stay back and stay quiet. They watched. Now as Elara opened the escape pod's hatch and examined the interior with a critical eye, "Commander." Dei-chan finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse with a mixture of horror and awe. "What are you doing?" "What needs to be done?" Elara replied without turning around, and she began the process of loading the Sara's ruined body into the pod. The war priestess was awake again, barely her remaining eye tracking Elara's movements with a glazed expression that might have been hatred or might have been something else entirely. The Pod's life support is damaged, Elara said as she worked. But there's enough air and power to keep you alive until you reach Valkyrie space barely. The Zara tried to speak, but only managed a wet, rattling cough. I'm going to activate the emergency beacon and the recording system, Elara continued. And you're going to deliver a message for me when your people come to pick you up. She finished securing the Zara in the pod's single seat and crouched down to look directly into the War Priestess's remaining eye. Can you understand me? Elara asked, her voice cold and precise. The Zara managed a weak nod, and Elara could see the hatred burning behind the pain, the ancient predator's pride refusing to die even when her body was broken beyond recognition. Good, Elara said, because I want you to remember every word of what I'm about to tell you, and I want you to make sure your empire hears it too. She stood up and stepped back, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 8 billion souls. We came to your space as diplomats, she said. We came with open hands and peaceful intentions, hoping to establish trade and cultural exchange and all the things that civilized species do when they meet each other among the stars. Your people answered our friendship with ambush and slaughter. You killed my crew, good men and women who had never harmed anyone, who had families waiting for them back on Earth, who died wondering what they had done to deserve such a fate. She leaned forward, and her burned face was terrible in the dim emergency lighting. That was a mistake. You thought you were dealing with just another prey species, just another civilization to conquer and enslave and add to your collection of trophies. You were wrong. She began to pace, her voice growing harder with every word. Earth has 8 billion people on it. 8 billion humans who grew up on a death world where everything tried to kill them, who descended from ancestors who murdered their way to the top of the food chain, who carry the survival instincts of 1,000,000 years of constant warfare in their blood. And we have weapons that your species cannot even imagine. We split the atom because we were curious about what would happen, and then we built bombs that could vaporize cities in a single flash of light. We engineered diseases in laboratories as weapons, and then we engineered cures because we couldn't decide whether we wanted to use them or not. We created machines that can think faster than any biological mind, and we are teaching them how to wage war. We have weapons that can crack planets, that can poison atmospheres, that can turn entire star systems into graveyards, and we built all of these things to use against each other. She stopped pacing and faced the Tsar directly. The wars we have fought against our own kind make your entire conquest look like a border skirmish. Millions of us have died in single battles, not over centuries. But in a matter of days, we burned entire cities to ash because we disagreed about politics and economics and ideas. And through all of it, we never stopped fighting, never stopped inventing new ways to kill each other, never stopped pushing the boundaries of what destruction was possible. She leaned close to the Zara one final time. So here is my message for the Valkyrie Dominion, she said. And her voice was soft now, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying than any shout could have been. We were happy being diplomats. We wanted to be friends, to trade and learn and grow alongside your people. But if you want a war with humanity instead, then so be it. We will burn your worlds to cinders. We will hunt your fleets across the galaxy until there is nothing left but debris. We will chase you the way our ancestors chased the antelope relentlessly, endlessly, without mercy or pause until your hearts give out and your empire collapses into dust. And when it is over, when the last Valkyrie has died screaming, we will build monuments to your memory, not out of respect, but as a warning to every other species who might think about attacking us. She straightened up and moved to the control panel. You have one chance, she said. Send an ambassador to Earth, not a fleet, not hunters, not warriors, but an ambassador, and maybe, just maybe, we can pretend this never happened. But if your next contact with humanity comes in the form of weapons, fire. She pressed the launch button, and the escape pod detached from the Meridian with a shudder. We will be the last enemy you ever make. 3 months later, a Valkyrie vessel entered the Sol system. It was not a warship, it was a diplomatic courier, and it carried aboard it an ambassador with full authority to negotiate on behalf of the Dominion. The ambassador brought tribute rare metals, advanced technology, star charts showing territories. The Valkyrie were willing to cede as reparations for the misunderstanding that had occurred. The humans accepted the tribute and the apology. And within a year, a formal peace treaty was signed between the two powers. But in the halls of the Valkyrie Dominion, a new word had entered the language. It had no direct translation. But scholars eventually settled on a rough approximation: the species that does not flee, and therefore cannot be hunted. The word was spoken in whispers, in the quiet moments when Valkyrie warriors gathered to share stories of the galaxy and the creatures that lived in it. It was taught to children as a warning, told to hunters as a lesson in humility, and whenever a Valkyrie ship encountered a human vessel in the vast emptiness between the stars, they did not attack, they did not threaten, they did not even attempt to establish dominance. They simply moved aside and let the humans pass, because they had learned, at last, the lesson that every predator on Earth had learned millions of years before them. Some prey is not worth hunting, and some prey is not prey at all. The word they used for humans spread throughout the galaxy, carried by traders and diplomats and refugees from 100 different worlds, and wherever it went, the message was the same: do not threaten the humans, do not attack the humans, do not give them a reason to. Remember that they were once the most terrifying predators their world had ever seen, because if you wake that ancient hunger that sleeps behind their soft eyes and gentle smiles, then you will learn what every creature that ever hunted humanity has learned. You will learn that there are worse things in the universe than predators. You will learn that the most dangerous creature is not the one with the sharpest claws or the deadliest venom. The most dangerous creature is the one that refuses to stop, the one that refuses to give up, the one that refuses to flee, and that creature is called human.